We're on Chapter 6 of Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Listen, Billy Pilgrim says he went to Dresden, Germany, on the day after his morphine night in the British compound in the center of the extermination camp for Russian prisoners of the war. Billy woke up at dawn on that day in January. There were no windows in the little hospital, and the ghostly candles had gone out. So only the light came from the pin-prick holes in the walls, and from the sketchy rectangle that outlined the imperfectly fitted door. Little Paul Lazaro, with a broken arm, snored on one bed. Edgar Derby, the high school teacher who would eventually be shot, snored on the other. Billy sat up in his bed. He had no idea what year it was or what planet he was on. Whatever the planet's name was, it was cold, but it wasn't the cold that had awakened Billy. It was the animal magnetism which was making him shiver and itch. It gave him profound aches in his musculature, as though he had been exercising hard. The animal magnetism was coming from behind him. If Billy had to guess as the source, he would have said that there was a vampire bat hanging upside down on the wall behind him. Billy moved forward toward the foot of his cot before turning to look at whatever it was. He didn't want the animal to drop into his face and maybe claw his eyes out or bite off his big nose. Then he turned. The source of the magnetism really did resemble a bat. It was Billy's impresario's coat with a fur collar. It was hanging from a nail. Now Billy backed toward it again, looking at it over his shoulder, feeling the magnetism increase. Then he faced it, kneeling on his cot, dared to touch it here and there, and he was seeking the exact source of the radiations. He found two small sources, 2 lumps an inch apart and hidden in the lining. One was shaped like a pea, the other was shaped like a tiny horseshoe. Billy received a message carried by the radiations. He was told not to find out what the lumps were. He was advised to be content with knowing that they would work miracles for him, provided that he did not insist on learning their nature. It was all right with Billy Pilgrim. He was grateful. He was glad. Billy dozed, awakened in the prison hospital again. The sun was high. Outside were Golgotha sounds of strong men digging holes for upright timbers and hard ground. Englishmen were building themselves a new latrine. They had abandoned their old latrine to the Americans in their theater, the place where the feast had been held, too. Six Englishmen staggered through a hospital with a pool table on which several mattresses were piled. They were transferring it to the living quarters attached to the hospital. They were followed by an Englishman dragging his mattress and carrying a dartboard. The man with the dartboard was the blue fairy godmother, who had injured little Paul Lazaro. He stopped by Lazaro's bed, asked Lazaro how he was doing. Lazaro told him he was going to have him killed after the war. Oh? You made a big mistake, said Lazaro. Anybody touches me, he better kill me, or I'm gonna have him killed. The blue fairy godmother knew something about killing. He gave Lazaro a careful smile. There is still time for me to kill you, he said. If you really persuade me that it's the sensible thing to do. Why don't you go fuck yourself? Don't think I haven't tried, said the blue fairy godmother answered. The blue fairy godmother left, amused and patronizing. When he was gone, Lazaro promised Billy and poor old Edgar Derby that he was going to have revenge, and that revenge was sweet. It's the sweetest thing there is, said Lazaro. People fuck with me, he said, and Jesus Christ, are they ever fucking sorry. I laugh like hell. I don't care if it's a guy or a dame. The President of the United States fucked around with me. I'd fix him good. You should have seen what I did to a dog one time. A dog, said Billy. Son of a bitch bit me. So I got some steak, and I got me a spring out of a clock, and I cut that spring up into little pieces. I put pieces on the ends of the pieces. They were sharp as razor blades. I stuck them into the steak way inside, and when I went past where they had tied up the dog, he wanted to bite me again. I said, "Come on, doggy, let's be friends. Let's not be enemies anymore. I'm not mad." He believed me. He did. I threw him the steak. He swallowed it down in one big gulp. I waited for about 10 minutes. Now Lazaro's eyes twinkled. Blood started coming out of his mouth. He started crying. He rolled on the ground, as though the knives were on the outside of him instead of the inside of him. Then he tried to bite out his own insides. I laughed. I said to him, "You got the right idea now. Tear your guts out, boy. That's me in there with all those knives. So it goes." Anybody ever ask you what the sweetest thing in life is? Said Lazaro. It's revenge. When Dresden was destroyed later on, incidentally, Lazaro did not exult. He didn't have anything against the Germans, he said. Also, he said he liked to take his enemies one at a time. He was proud of never having to hurt any innocent bystander. Nobody ever got it from Lazaro, he said, who didn't have it coming. Poor old Edgar Derby, the high school teacher, got in the conversation now. He asked Lazaro if he planned to feed the blue fairy godmother clock springs and steak. Shit, said Lazaro. He's a pretty big man, said Derby, who, of course, was a pretty big man himself. Size don't mean a thing. You're going to shoot him? I'm going to have him shot, said Lazaro. When he'll get home after the war, he'll be a big hero. The dames'll be climbing all over him. He'll settle down. A couple years will go by. And then one day there'll be a knock at the door. He'll answer the door, and there will be a stranger out there. The stranger will ask him if he's so-and-so. And when he says he is, the stranger will say, Paul Lazaro sent me, and he'll pull a gun and shoot his pecker off. The stranger will let him think for a couple seconds about who Paul Lazaro is and what life's going to be like without a pecker. Then he'll shoot him once in the guts and walk away. So it goes. Lazaro said that he could have anybody in the world killed for $1,000 plus traveling expenses. He had a list in his head, he said. Derby asked him who all was on the list, and Lazaro said, just make fucking sure you don't get on it. Just don't cross me, that's all. There was silence, and he added, and don't cross my friends. You have friends? Derby wanted to know. In the war? Said Lazaro. Yeah, I had a friend in the war. He's dead. So it goes. That's too bad. Lazaro's eyes were twinkling again. Yeah, he was my buddy on the boxcar. His name was Ronald Wary. He died in my arms. Now he pointed to Billy with his one mobile hand. He died on account of this silly cocksucker here. So I promised him I'd have this silly cocksucker shot after the war. Lazaro erased his hand anything Billy Pilgrim might be about to say. Just forget about it, kid, he said. Enjoy life while you can. Nothing's going to happen for maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But let me give you some piece of advice. Whenever the doorbell rings, have somebody else answer the door. Billy Pilgrim says now that this really is the way he's going to die. As a time traveler, he has seen his own death many times. It has described it to a tape recorder. The tape was locked up in his will with some of the other valuables in a safe deposit on the Illinium Merchants National Bank and Trust, he says. I, Billy Pilgrim, the tape begins, will die, have died, and always will die on February 13th, 1976. At the time of his death, he says, he's in Chicago to address a large crowd on the subject of flying saucers and the true nature of them. His home was still in Ilium. He had to cross 3 international borders to reach Chicago. The United States of America has been balkanized, has been divided into 20 petty nations so that it will never again be a threat to world peace. Chicago has been hydrobombed by angry Chinamen. So it goes. It is all brand new. Billy is speaking before a capacity audience in a baseball park, which is covered by a geodesic dome. The flag of the country is behind him. It is a Hereford Bowl on a field of green. Billy predicts his own death within an hour. He laughed about it. Invites the crowd to laugh with him. It is high time I was dead, he says. Many years ago, he said, a certain man promised to have killed me. He is an old man now, living not far from here. He has read all the publicity associated with my appearance in your fair city. He is insane. Tonight, he will keep his promise. There are protests in the crowd. Billy rebukes them. If you protest, if you think that death is a terrible thing, then you have not understood a word I've said. Now he closes his speech as he closes every speech with these words. Farewell, hello, farewell, hello. There are police around him as he leaves the stage. They are to protect him from the crush of popularity. No threats on his life have been made since 1945. The police offer to stay with him. They are floridly willing to stand in a circle around him all night with their zap guns drawn. No, says Billy serenely. It is time for you to go home to your wives and children, and it is time for me to be dead for a little while and then live again. At that moment, Billy's high forehead is in the crosshairs of a high-powered laser gun. It is aimed at him from the darkened press box, and the next moment, Billy Pilgrim is dead. So it goes. So Billy experiences death for a while. It is simply a violent light and a hum. There isn't anybody else there. Not even Billy Pilgrim is there. Then he swings back to life again, all the way back to an hour after his life was threatened by Lazaro in 1945. He had been told to get out of his hospital bed and dress, that he is well. He and Lazaro and poor Edgar Derby are able to join the fellows in the theater. They There, they will choose a leader for themselves by secret ballot in a free election. Billy and Lazaro and poor Edgar Derby crossed the prison yard to the theater now. Billy was carrying his little coat as though it was a lady's muff. It was wrapped around and around his hand. He was the central clown in an unconscious travesty of an oil painting, the spirit of 76. Edgar Derby was writing letters home in his head, telling his wife that he is alive and well, and that she shouldn't worry, and that the war was nearly over, that he would be home soon. Lazaro was talking to himself about people he was going to have killed after the war, and the rackets he was going to work, and the women he was going to make fuck him, whether they wanted to or not. If he had been a dog in the city, a policeman would have shot him and sent his head to the laboratory to see if he had rabies. So it goes. As they neared the theater, they came upon an Englishman who had been hacking a groove in the earth with the heel of his boot. He was marking a boundary between the American and English sections of the compound. Billy and Lazaro and Derby didn't have to ask what the line meant. It was a familiar symbol of childhood. The theater was paved with American bodies and nestled up like spoons. Most of the Americans were stupors or asleep. Their guts were fluttering dry. "Close the fucking door," said Billy. Were you born in a barn? Billy closed it, took a hand from his muff, touched the stove. It was as cold as ice. The stage was still set for Cinderella. Azure candle curtains hung from the arches that were shocking pink. There were golden thrones in the dummy clock, whose hands were set at midnight. Cinderella's slippers, which were a man's boots painted silver, were capsized side by side under the golden throne. Billy and poor Edgar Derby and Lazaro had been in the hospital when the British passed out blankets and mattresses, so they had none. They had to improvise. The only space open to them was up on the stage, so up they went, pulled the azure curtains down, and made nests. Billy, curled in his azure nest, found himself staring at Cinderella's silver boots under the throne. Then he remembered that his shoes were ruined, and he needed boots. He hated to get out of his nest, but he forced himself to do it. He crawled to the boots on all fours, tried them on. The boots fit perfectly. Billy Pilgrim was Cinderella, and Cinderella was Billy Pilgrim. Somewhere in there was a lecture on personal hygiene by the head Englishman, and then a free election. At least half of the Americans went on snoozing through it all. The Englishman got up on stage, and he wrapped one arm around the throne with a swagger stick, called, "Lads, lad, can I have your attention, please?" and so on. What the Englishman said about the survival was this: if you stop taking pride in your appearance, you'll very soon die. He said that he had seen several men die in the following way. They ceased to stand up straight, they ceased to shave or wash, then they ceased to get out of bed. They ceased to talk, then died. There is so much to be said for it. It is evidently a very easy and painless way to go. So it goes. The Englishman said that he, when captured, had made and kept the following vows to himself: to brush his teeth twice a day, to shave once a day, to wash his face and hands before every meal and after going to the latrine, to polish his shoes once a day, to exercise for at least half an hour each morning, and then move his bowels, and to look into a mirror frequently, frankly evaluating his appearance, particularly with respect to posture. Billy Pilgrim heard all of this while lying in his nest. He looked not at the Englishman's face, but his ankles. "I envy you, lads," said the Englishman. Somebody laughed. Billy wondered what the joke was. "You lads are leaving this afternoon for Dresden, a beautiful city, I'm told. You won't be cooped up like us. You'll be out where life is. The food is certain to be more plentiful than here. If I may inject a personal note, it has been 5 years now since I have seen a tree or a flower or a woman or a child or a dog or a cat or a place of entertainment or a human being doing useful work of any kind. You don't need to worry about bombs, by the way. Dresden is an open city. It is undefended and contains no war industries or troop concentrations of any importance." So this right here is important because it's foreshadowing. And it gives us important info that Dresden was, in fact, an open city. And it tells you what an open city is. And we know because of this, because of what's been told already, that Dresden was in fact an open city, but it was also bombed. Somewhere in there, old Edgar Derby was elected head American. The Englishman called for nominations from the floor, and there weren't any. So he nominated Derby, praising him for all his maturity and long experience in dealing with people. There were no further nominations, so the nominations were closed. All in favor, 2 or 3 people said aye. Then poor Edgar Derby made a speech. He thanked the Englishman for his good advice, said he meant to follow it exactly. He said he was sure that all the other Americans would do that as well. He said that his primary responsibility was now to make damn sure that everybody got home safely. Go take a flying fuck at that rolling donut, murmured Paul Lazaro in his azure nest. Go take a flying fuck at the moon. The temperature climbed sturdily that day. It was noontime. The noontime was balmy. The Germans brought soup and bread in 2-wheeled carts, which were pulled by the Russians. The Englishmen sent over real coffee and sugar and marmalade and cigarettes and cigars, and the doors of the theater were left open so the warmth could get in. The Americans began to feel much better. They were able to hold their food. And then it was time to go to Dresden. The Americans marched fairly stylishly out of the British compound. Billy Pilgrim again led the parade. He was in silver boots now, and a muff, and a piece of azure curtain that he wore like a toga. Billy still had a beard. So did poor old Edgar Derby, who was beside him. Derby was imagining letters to home, his lips working tremendously. Dear Margaret, we are leaving for Dresden today. Don't worry, it will never be bombed. It is an open city. There was an election at noon. And guess what? And so on. They came to the prison railroad yard again. They had arrived only on 2 cars. They would depart far more comfortably on 4. They saw the dead hobo again. He was frozen stiff in the weeds behind the track. He was in a fetal position, even trying in death to nestle like a spoon with others. There were no others now. He was nestling within the air and cinders. Somebody had taken his boots. His bare feet were blue and ivory. It was all right somehow. His being dead. So it goes. The trip to Dresden was a lark. It only took 2 hours. Shriveled little bellies were full. Sunlight and cold air came in through the ventilators. There were plenty of smokes from the Englishmen. The Americans arrived in Dresden at 5 in the afternoon. The boxcar doors were opened, and the doorways framed the loveliest city that most Americans had ever seen. The skyline was intricate and voluptuous and enchanted and absurd. It looked like the Sunday school picture of heaven to Billy Pilgrim. Someone behind him in the boxcar said, Oz. That was I. That was me. The only other city I'd ever seen was Indianapolis, Indiana. So this is just kind of like a cool structure with this, because he doesn't do this in any of his other books. But it's the fact that in this line right here, he inserts himself in the book. This is the second time he does it, but it's just kind of a cool thing, because not many authors do this. But this is a way for you guys to remember that Kurt Vonnegut lived through this. That maybe this isn't written in the perspective of him during the war, but this is a first-hand account still. Every other big city in Germany had been bombed and burned ferociously. Dresden had not suffered so much as a cracked window pane. Sirens went off every day, screamed like hell, and people went down into cellars and listened to the radios there. The planes were always bound for someplace else. Leipzig, Chemnitz, Plauen, places like that. So it goes. Steam radiators still whistled cheerily in Dresden. Streetcars clanged, telephones rang and were answered. Lights went on and off when switches were clicked. There were theaters and restaurants. There was a zoo. The principal enterprises of the city were medicine and food processing, and the making of cigarettes. People were going home from work now in the late afternoon. They were tired. 8 Dresdeners crossed the steel spaghetti of the railroad track. They were wearing new uniforms. They had been sworn into the army the day before. They were boys and men past middle age, 2 veterans who had been shot to pieces in Russia. Their assignment was to guard 100 American prisoners of war who would work as contract labor. A grandfather and a grandson were in the squad. The grandfather was an architect. The 8 were grim as they approached the boxcars containing their wards. They knew what sick and foolish soldiers they themselves appeared to be. One of them actually had an artificial leg and carried not only a loaded rifle but a cane. They were expected to earn obedience and respect from tall, cocky, murderous American infantrymen who had just come from all of the killing up in the front. And then they saw bearded Billy Pilgrim with his blue toga and silver shoes, with his hands in a muff. He looked at least 16 years old. Next to Billy was little Paul Lazaro with a broken arm. He was fizzing with rabies. Next to Lazaro was the poor old high school teacher, Edgar Derby, mournfully pregnant with patriotism and middle age and imaginary wisdom, and so on. The 8 ridiculous Dreadstenders ascertained that these 100 ridiculous creatures were really American fighting men fresh out from the front. They smiled, and then they laughed. Their terror evaporated. There was nothing to be afraid of. Here were more crippled human beings, more fools like themselves. Here was light opera. So out of the gate of the railroad yard and into the streets of Dresden marched the light opera. Billy Pilgrim was the star. He led the parade. Thousands of people were on the sidewalk, going home from work. They were watery and putty-colored, having eaten mostly potatoes during the last 2 years. They had expected no blessings beyond the mildness of the day. Suddenly, here was fun. Billy did not meet many of the eyes that found him so entertaining. He was enchanted by the architecture of the city. Mary and Morty wove garlands above the windows. Roguish fawns and naked nymphs peeked down at Billy Pilgrim's festooned cornices. Stone monkeys frisked among strolls and seashells and bamboo. Billy, with his memory of the future, knew that the city would soon be smashed to smithereens and then buried in about 30 days. Ooh, hold on. He knew, too, that most of the people watching him would soon be dead. So it goes. And Billy Pilgrim worked his hands in his muff as he marched. His fingertips, working in the hot darkness of the muff, wanted to know what the 2 lumps of the lining of the little Imprecio's coat were. The fingertips got inside the lining. They palpitated the lumps, the pea-sized thing and the horseshoe-shaped thing. The parade had to halt by a busy corner. The traffic light was red. There at the corner, at the front rank of the pedestrians, was a surgeon who had been operating all day. He was a civilian, but his posture was military. He had served in 2 world wars. The sight of Billy offended him, especially after he learned from the guards that Billy was an American. It seemed to him that Billy was an abominable taste. Suppose that Billy had gone to do a lot of silly trouble to costume himself just so. The surgeon spoke English, and he said to Billy, "I take it that you find war a very comical thing." Billy looked at him vaguely. He had lost track momentarily of where he was or how he had gotten there. He had no idea that people thought he was clowning. It was fate, of course, which had costumed him. Fate, a feeble will to survive. "Did you expect us to laugh?" the surgeon asked him. The surgeon was demanding some sort of satisfaction. Billy was mystified. Billy wanted to be friendly, to help if he could, but his resources were meager. His fingers were now held the 2 objects from the lining of the coat. Billy decided to show the surgeon what they were. "You thought we would enjoy being mocked," said the surgeon, "and do you feel proud to represent America as you do?" Billy withdrew his hand from his muff, held it under the surgeon's nose. On his palm rested a 2-carat diamond and a partial denture. The denture was an obscene little artifact, silver and pearl and tangerine. Billy smiled. The parade pranced, staggered, and reeled to the gate of the Dresden slaughterhouse. And then it went inside. The slaughterhouse wasn't a busy place anymore. Almost all the hoofed animals in Germany had been killed and eaten and excreted by human beings. Mostly soldiers. So it goes. The Americans were taken to the 5th building inside the gate. It was a 1-story cement block cube with sliding doors in the front and the back. And it had been built as a shelter for pigs about to be butchered. Now it was going to serve as a home away from home for 100 American prisoners of war. There were bunks in there, and 2 pot-bellied stoves and a water tap. Behind it was the latrine, which was a one-rail fence with buckets under it. there was a big number over the door of the building. The number was 5. Before the Americans could go inside, their only English-speaking guard told them to memorize their simple address in case they got lost in the big city. Their address was this. Slaughterhouse Fünf. Slaughterhouse means slaughterhouse. Fünf is good old 5. All right, that is the end of chapter 6. So he didn't do much time traveling. He didn't. He predicted his death. So, in Billy Pilgrim's terms of events, he's going to die, I think it was like in 78 or something like that. And the U.S. is balkanized, so meaning that the Balkans used to be like a huge country, and now it's like all broken up into like little bits and pieces of countries. That's what he thinks the U.S. is going to happen, and then he's going to be killed via Lazaro, or a hitman that was paid by Lazaro, after the end of a speech and an event. And then we finally get to see how the book gets its name, which is Slaughterhouse 5. Which is where Billy, and also let's not forget the author, that's where the prisoners of war go. And I believe it's already said in the book, but the big reason why it's called Slaughterhouse 5 is because there's a bunker underneath where Billy Pilgrim / Kurt Vonnegut will be when the firebombing happens. But that is the end of chapter 6. We will do chapter 7 another day.